There is a critical issue that haunts the balance sheets and future plans of countless businesses across the globe. It's a problem so pervasive yet so accepted as just the way things are that many people don't even question it. What is it? Paying rent. And that's what we're talking about today on Marc Haine Live. Welcome to this episode. This is where small business owners and entrepreneurs develop new skills to help them create the jaw dropping, show stopping experience that their customers and their employees deserve. I am your host, customer and employee experience strategist, Marc Haine. Thank you so much for joining me today. My guest for this episode is the owner of Vantage Point Capital, Paul Neal. And today, we will be putting on a spotlight on the true impact of leasing your property and the impact that it has on your business. And we're going to talk about some strategies you can use to turn the tide on the massive outflow of cash that you make each and every month. So stick with us. My one ask is that if you know somebody who could use this episode, please go ahead and share this information. Share the episode, share a link to this episode. Knowledge is power, but my goodness, it's only powerful if we share it. You know, every month, a substantial chunk of your earned business revenue vanishes before your very eyes. It's not going into new investments, it's not being saved for a rainy day, and it's definitely not funding your next big project. Instead, it's lining the pockets of your landlord, leaving you with little more than a thank you note in the form of a rent receipt and an expense line on your financials. So that brings us to our question of the day. So, have you ever stopped to calculate how much of your business potential is being compromised by the seamlessly ending cycle of lease payments? I know that we think of it as a normal part of doing business, but is it really? I'd love for you to be part of this conversation. Why don't you go ahead, share this episode on your favorite social media platform, put down your comments about what you learned today and what your thoughts are, and make sure that you hashtag it experience leadership. I'd love for you to be part of this conversation. My guest today is the owner of Vantage Point Commercial Capital and the host of the Brick and Mortar Money Show, Paul Neal. Paul is a financial strategist and author dedicated to transforming the way entrepreneurs view commercial properties. His book is called Un-lease Your Business, Unlock Wealth, Autonomy and Control by Buying Your Building and Firing Your Landlord. It offers a new perspective on achieving autonomy and wealth. Paul, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
Hey, Mark, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, lovely. Before we get too deep into today's topic, could you tell us a little bit about how you serve your clients?
Yeah, most of my clients are business owners, entrepreneurs, and high performing professionals that have local businesses essentially, where they serve local customers or they have a need for employees or staff or something to come to a physical location. So most of my clients are not, internet gazillionaires that that have no physical presence anywhere, right? They're serving the community in different ways. Again, at the employee level, the customer, the client level. And as you so eloquently put it in the beginning of the introduction about, buying your space, these professionals are leasing business space, and most of them have been for some time. And we show them a path forward on how they can plug some of the holes in the drains in their bucket of that lease money coming out every month.
So I'm looking forward to digging into this today because, of course, this is the topic of what we're talking about today. Is maybe a different way of being able to look at our businesses. How does the traditional lease model really fail to serve the long-term interests of business operators today?
Yeah, I mean, from what we've seen, and again, I want to sort of classify this, and this is really for businesses that are established and they're stable and they're growing. Generally, not brand new startup businesses. Obviously, need to focus on getting to the point where they're profitable. But for those that are stable, and the vast majority of them are, and they're growing, the lease it doesn't serve them primarily in a number of ways. And really kind of came to my attention through working with some of my clients early in the real estate finance world, where I would see and work with a lot of professionals and business owners that were generating a lot of cash. But as they were getting on in years, many of them had service based businesses, and yeah, they had great incomes, but a lot of them didn't have strong retirement plans. A lot of them didn't have a strong, asset base. And then they would look to sell their business, and there wasn't much there in the business when they decided to check out. Mostly just what we call goodwill, a customer base, and whatnot. And
Yeah.
so there was a glaring loss of opportunity that most of these entrepreneurs were losing. And the silly thing is, it's one of these things. It's like you're walking on it every day. It's like it's right there beneath your feet, and most aren't thinking about it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I talked to one gentleman as a guest on the show couple of years ago, where he had a flooring shop, and his first location, he actually felt like he just got absolutely raped by the landlord. To the
Mhm.
point where he decided that's it, I can't survive in this space anymore, and he went out and leased another location. But then he was so fearful of getting hoodwinked again that he actually went out to them and went to the banks, and he actually purchased the business outright. And he really attributes that to the ability to successfully run that business for the last 25 years because he made that one decision.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge, and there's a lot of hidden cost of leasing as well. You talking about being sort of taken advantage of by the landlord. You sign a lease as a business for generally 3 years or 5 years or maybe more.
Mhm.
And as long as it suits the landlord's needs and purposes, that they'd be happy to renew when that time comes up, right? After you've spent your time focused on building your business and maybe a local clientele that's used to coming to that location. But if it doesn't suit their needs, then they may not renew, or they may raise the rent significantly. And we all know it's difficult to move. It's difficult to, I mean, heck, it's difficult to move your business bank accounts, for crying out loud, right? When you have all these transactions coming in, and then talking about moving your business itself, it's harder as your business gets larger. And so yeah, you lose all kinds of control. You lose some leverage opportunities, and just a host of things. We had a client that owned a couple pizza shops. He was an immigrant, been here for 8 or 9 years. He's got two pizza shops. One of them in particular, he rented both of the spaces, and one of them in particular, he had, like, I think he invested around $80,000 in getting the kitchen built out. Now, mind you, it wasn't his building. It was doing leasehold improvements on somebody else's property, right?
Yep.
And his proper and so he could have his processes, his kitchen, and everything where it needs to be. So a few years into it, the landlord showed up one day and said, "Hey, I'm selling the building." So, what do you do with a local pizza shop, right? It's not like,
Yeah.
you can just move next door conveniently and everyone follows. That there's a lot involved in that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so fortunately, we were able to help him negotiate with the landlord to actually buy the building. So they gave him the opportunity to do that, and he was able to buy it. And it was a very defensive situation, but sometimes that isn't going to be the case, right? It's going to
Right.
be like,
Right.
hey, we're going to sell this, and they're going to put something else here, and good luck. It's been a nice relationship.
Well, and isn't it funny because the power that the landowner has in selling a building with an established business is that there's an established business,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And so when they sell it, and if somebody comes in wanting that space, regardless of their established business, you have no recourse. You're going to be given your 3 months notice or whatever, and you're done.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. But, on the flip side, what we see a lot of too, it's not just the sort of defensive or, sort of the negatives of paying rent. It's the opportunity cost that as a business owner you lose by paying all that rent, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, you think about it in terms of what most people are familiar with. You think about your own personal home. most people don't rent, their personal home after maybe, the first few years, maybe they're getting started in life, getting married or whatever. Okay, they're going to rent, maybe move around a little bit. But once you get established, one of the major goals for people is to buy the home, right? And why do you want to buy your home? Well, you want to make your wife happy if you're married like me. But beyond that, you have control over the premises. You can build it out to however you like without having to ask permission. And so you can sort of gin up the best customer and employee experience. Every payment that you make on that property is contributing to the increase in equity. There's some tax advantages for buying your own property versus renting someone else's, and of course, the as you build equity in your home, it gives you the opportunity at some point to potentially move up to a larger home when your family gets larger. You may have struggled for your initial down payment, but now you've got this equity in your house because it's appreciated over time, and you've paid down some of the principal mortgage over time, and so you can use that money to as a down payment for the next house, or you could use that equity in your house for other things like maybe starting a business or potentially sending a child to college. There's things you can leverage. And at the end of the day, when you look back over, 20, 30 years of paying on that house, you hopefully have a paid for home where you've continued to scale up and you have a substantial amount of equity that had you rented, you look back and, hey, the same 20 or 30 years is going to pass. And on one hand, you have this asset that's worth something. On the other hand, you had a good time. It's just a memory, right? It's like, okay, it was been there, done that. And a great example is one of my clients, Kathy. She's a friend. She's an OBGYN, and her husband Jim. He's a little crazy. He was a Navy SEAL, and so he's very on things. And so he was on her to like, hey, you need to buy your building. So about 12, 13 years ago, they bought their building. And she since has paid it off, the practice. She was going to pay rent to somebody. She's paid off the building. But a funny thing happened, Mark. So about a year ago, maybe a year and a half now, one of these larger medical groups who sort of buys up the small practices, as they build, their larger enterprises, approached her to buy her practice. She's thinking, hey, I want to retire in a few years anyway. So she inked a very nice deal, sold her the practice. They allowed her to continue to stay on as a physician for, as long as she wants, and which is not that long, but long enough. So she got a payout for selling the business. She gets to continue to work on basically on her terms in the business. And oh, by the way, since it's a local business and the patients are used to coming to that building, the new owner said, well, why don't we just rent the building from you? So now she's got this amazing, retirement cash flow, a nice 5-figure monthly payment coming in every single month, whether she ever does another mammogram or not in her life. Or she could sell the building if she choose to, if she wanted to lump sum for some reason, maybe she wanted to move to, Puerto Rico or whatnot. But so she has options, and those 12 years would have passed either way.
Yeah. And what's interesting is there's a benefit to the big corporation renting because they're picking up practices without really understanding necessarily how successful the practice is going to be over the long term. And so for
Right.
them, it's a way to de-risk the investment of picking up the practice that they don't know if they're going to keep that going for any length of time. So why not just rent the building? They have the fortitude and the financials to be able to support that.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And then she's in the catbird seat, a few years down the road, assuming it works out the way everyone hopes. The likelihood of them wanting to move the practice at that point is probably pretty low. And
Yes.
so, so she's sort of the one, the tail wagging the dog on how much she can actually get for the building.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and
so
again,
it's a lot
because
of
it's got an existing successful business in it, at some point when she does wanna sell it, she gives them first right of refusal, and she can pretty much name her price.
Well, that's another point too, and we see this with a lot of like service-based businesses, like your HVAC company, and
Mm,
we have a right now we've got a guy who owns it's a high-end remodeling company, and he's building a warehouse, 12,000 square feet, and he's only going to use about 7,000 of it, and he's going to rent the other part out. But what you see is with a lot of these service-based businesses, a lot of times the owner operators get to the point where they want to sell the business. And
mhm,
to the point you just made, the the business is more valuable with the real estate. And you actually can attract more of a buyer pool for a business that has real estate, because from a financial standpoint, it's easier to finance a business with real estate than just a business with no real estate.
I was just going to ask you about that because you mentioned the pizzeria.
Mhm,
It is incredibly difficult to get financing for a restaurant
mhm,
because the risk is so high to the financial institutions.
right.
Would you say that the risk is mitigated if you are buying a building and putting in a restaurant?
Yes, yes, because you do have a tangible asset there that could be converted to cash, could be sold if, should the business falter.
Hmm.
But the other thing is that, not only do you have a tangible asset, generally we can finance an acquisition with real estate and go out to 25 years on the term, versus on a just a straight up business acquisition, generally it's about 10.
Wow.
So you think about, how much payment savings monthly and monthly cash flow, by just stretching that loan term out an extra 15 years, is really beneficial to the new business owner, because the debt service isn't as high, and so it makes the numbers work better, and so therefore the finance guys, the banks, the investors, they like that. And then, the new owner of the business likes it because, again, the monthly nut's not so high, right?
Right.
um, so you don't have a 10-year term on the business you're buying, plus now a lease payment that you're paying someone else. And so it opens the pool of available buyers that can come in and buy the business, because of that, the cash flow. And so there's a number of reasons why it's an advantage to have real estate tied with it,
I love it.
first from a
Uh,
sales standpoint.
I'd love to talk about some misconceptions and some myths business owners
Mhm.
have about leasing versus owning, and we'll get to that right after this.
When the spotlight shines on your business, are customers applauding or yawning? In other words, how is your business performing? Make your business a star with the new book, Lights, Camera, Action: Business Operational Excellence Through the Lens of Live Theater by Marc Haine. Marc uses his business and acting experience to help you see your business like a live show, so you can create a performance your customers will never forget. Buy Lights, Camera, Action today at your favorite online retailer or directly at marchaine.com.
Just in our short time together, you've given me so many things to think about. One thing I do want to talk about is kind of the business condo deals. I had a friend of mine who entered into that. I'd like to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But in the meantime, I do know that when I do talk to small businesses, there's all sorts of kind of hand waving and people just don't know enough. Are there any misconceptions that business owners have about owning their commercial space versus leasing that you constantly hear about that the myth needs to be busted?
Yeah, I mean, I think the single biggest myth out there, and there's some truth to it, but most people's conception of when they go to buy a commercial business is that a building is that they need 20 to 25% down payment. So it's a very large down payment, and that can be confiscatory and prohibitory for a lot of people, particularly when you think a commercial building could be $1 million, $1.5 million, 2, 3 million, whatever. So it
Mhm.
adds up quickly, and it's not that maybe you as the business don't have that cash available. You might want that cash for, or need it for, working capital, or I just reserves. I'm a huge advocate of liquidity and reserves for businesses and small
Right.
business owners.
So important.
You know, yeah, because it's such volatile. So, and if you march down to your local bank, most small business people are heads down, focused. A lot of them are working in the business, not on the business, right? And then,
Yes.
so instead of building the business as the product, as Michael Gerber would say, they're building in the business. They're a technician doing the work and so
Right.
forth. And so, as such, they're heads down. They have a relationship with maybe a local banker who's got their deposits, their main, depository bank account. Which, by the way, is what the bank wants. That's what they want, is your deposits. They don't want the loans really for small business people, because that's a lot of risk for them. But the deposits is what they want, because when they have your operating account, they're running $200,000-300,000 a month in that operating account. Then they're using that and leveraging that, in what they call in a fractional way. And really in the last year, there's been even more of that, because there's been a banking liquidity crisis. But Anyway, that's a whole nother concept and top topic for a different day. But so they're going to tell you we want 20 to 25% down. And the reason why they want to tell you that is because that minimizes any risk that they have in the deal, right?
Right.
Um, the truth of the matter is, if you have a performing business that's cash flowing, then you can get in a commercial building for as little as 0% down if you're going to move your business in it and you're going to operate. We call that owner occupied commercial real estate. As opposed to, Mark, if you want to buy like a multifamily, apartment building where you're going to rent it all out, that would be investment commercial real estate, right? Or a strip shopping center, you're going to just invest. That's different. But owner occupied, you're moving your business in there. It's cash flowing, and if the numbers work, and when I say numbers, really what we're looking at is a margin of net income for your business over what that debt service on the building would be, and generally 15 to 25% above that is adequate. The thing is that most businesses are already doing that because they're making a rent payment. So you're not adding a new expense. You're basically trading one for another one, right? Giving up your rent and picking up the mortgage. And
Right.
so most typically we see about 10% down is really where we land with most businesses. But again, it can be as little as zero. It could be more if you want, or you're in position to do that. So that's really, for most businesses, is the thing that is the preconceived notion that stops a lot of people from really looking into it. Or they might go talk to their local banker and they don't go in prepared, and it seems like, well, this is really complicated and there's a lot to it. And it can be complicated. There is more to it on buying commercial space, right? There's more due diligence. There's more involved in the process. So it's not like you drop everything in 30 days. Like, if you decide you want to move and buy a new residential house, that's pretty boilerplate, pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
Little different for commercial. And so what we suggest is, be thinking about it, before your lease comes up. Start thinking about this 6 months, 12 months, 18 months before you have a lease renewal. And then so you can go into it intelligently and get your sort of ducks in a row. And that's really kind of where we focus. Is we realize that so many people, they sort of jump in too late into the deal, and everything becomes stressful, and it becomes a mess, and there's a lot of potential issues there. Like in commercial, if you go into contract on a property, you have to put earnest money down like you do in residential. Typically, it's a little bit more just because, it's a larger acquisition generally. And commercial generally has what they call a due diligence period. And if you don't get out of the contract due to financing or some property issue, whatever, in that period, then whatever due diligence money or earnest money you put down becomes what they call hard, which means you lose it, whether you close or not.
Yeah.
So we're huge advocates of getting ahead of that in advance and being intelligent about it. There's no reason to rush into it, because if it's done right and intelligently, it's not stressful and it's not complicated. It's just a matter of gathering documents and so forth.
And being prepared. And to your point, when you're head down doing the work day to day, which unfortunately a lot of entrepreneurs are, this is their MO is, I'm an owner operator. I'm in there
Mhm.
every day. Like I know local pizzeria. He's a pizza man. So he's
Yeah.
in there every day. He's cooking, he's doing whatever. And it's not necessarily the most effective way to run your business, but he'll get the notice 3 months, 6 months before about the renewal with all the new
Right.
conditions and everything else. And it's like, then it becomes, oh my goodness, no, I should have. And now to your point, the stress is high. You're
Yep.
scrambling because now it's like, well, who do I talk to? How do I mitigate my lease? Who do I talk to get the payments down so that it's not so high? And then what are my other options? And this whole idea of turning around and buying. But I also see that with people who lack succession plans, and they say, hey, I'm 65 now. I think I'd like to retire this year. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you should have thought about that when you were 55.
Yeah. Right. Right. And if you own the property, you have more to succeed. You have more to pass on,
Yeah.
which is a whole
So
other side. But
in terms of opportunity cost, what are businesses missing out on by choosing to lease rather than to own? We mentioned the equity aspect of it. Is
Mhm.
there any other things that the reality of being a leaser versus an owner
Sure.
that they should be
Yeah.
aware of?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, a huge thing comes to mind is your mortgage payment or rent. So, in other words, I talked about the example earlier of my contractors building a 12,000 square foot building.
Right.
He's building a building, which, by the way, you can build a building to suit what you want. You don't have to buy something that's out there. So, if that's
Mhm.
something you want to do, like we have a veterinarian who did that, and she wanted to create the most awesome experience, not necessarily for the animals, but for the owners, right?
Yeah.
And so she had an architect design it, build it out, and it was just amazing. But so what he's going to do is he's going to occupy about 7,000 feet of this 7 or 8 of this 12,000 square foot building, and he's going to lease out the remaining 4 to 5,000 feet. Well, based on the cost of the land, and he's building a steel building, and the going rates in that particular area for leasing sort of this flex warehouse space,
Yep.
he's literally going to capture about the same amount in rent from the 4,000 square feet where there's a waiting list because it's high demand as his total mortgage payment.
There you go.
So the opportunity cost is to go literally to lower or no payment, have somebody else carry the freight, and they're paying your house, your mortgage off, your building off. They're building equity. So that's an opportunity. Opportunity number two would be growth. So as his business continues to grow, he's taken the extra 4 to 5,000 feet and he's basically divided it in two spaces. So he has the opportunity now as the landlord to say, hey, my business is really cooking. It's growing. I need more space. Instead of packing all my bags and moving to another building, I'm going to not renew one of the two leases and I'm going to move into the extra, add an extra 2,000 feet on my building. Or perhaps the opportunity as we have leverage. I was talking to someone just the other day. She's a chiropractor and coaches a lot of chiropractors. And she was talking about how she met someone who had a successful real estate business, and they were doing basically taking the equity from the building that they had bought. This wasn't one of my clients, and they used that equity to buy one of their competitors' businesses. So the money was there, just dormant, just basically in the floor of the building. It's like, all right, let's mine this up and use it. So you've got those opportunities. You have the tax advantages where essentially now you're setting up two companies. You have a real estate holding company which buys the building, and then you have your existing business, which is an operating company which pays rent to your other company. And so with a commercial building, you can do some things with depreciation like cost segregation. And so you can take a faster depreciation on the building to offset some of the revenue that you basically pay yourself in rent. And so you can defer some of your taxes that way. Because we all know that as you start making some decent income as an entrepreneur, that the tax code phases out a lot of the tax discounts, right? Or
Mhm.
deductions. So there's one that we already talked about. Control. So customization. You're a big customer experience guy. I have a great friend, Steve, who's a commercial contractor who has been building commercial buildings for some time, but he also had a cabinet business that he bought, and he was like 50% owner, and he had the opportunity to buy out the other guy. He did. And he basically went into the building that, oh, by the way, he owned. It was part of the deal. And he completely renovated it though, retooled the process, brought in a new manager who understood like Six Sigma concepts, and bought a new piece of equipment. And he literally almost doubled his output with the same staff just by reconfiguring the space. And
Yeah.
so you say, well, Paul, I'm leasing a building. My landlord will allow me to do that. Well, that might be the case, and that might not be the case, right? And so if you're the owner, you just go to the mirror and ask. And if you're a tenant, then your landlord might let you do it, but there's a price to be paid for that. Either you're going to pay it up front, or they might agree to help defer some of that cost, pay some of it with you. But to do that, they're going to extend your lease another X number of years. They may raise the lease rate. And again, at the end of the term, what do you have left when it's done? They still have the opportunity at the end of the 3 or 5 or 7 years to say, hey, Mark, it's been great. Appreciate you making your lease payments every month. I'm going to Florida because I'm 65 and this is my succession plan. It's sold, good luck. So control, And I think at the end of the day, there's also this sense of, if you're a business owner and entrepreneur, you're an owner in life, right? I mean, you got in business because you want to be in control. You want to own. I mean, you own your business, and you're to be congratulated. And if you got to the point where it's strong enough where you can, make a commitment to a building that's going to be long term, then you've done really well. So why not go the next step and say, this is mine. I mean, look what we've done. And so that sense of satisfaction where you own the building, you walk in it every day, you're like, man, this is pretty awesome. So there's a lot of reasons where it's an advantage. And again, a caveat and asterisk: if the business is fledgling or it's a startup or whatever, it's not the time to be thinking about buying a building. That's where you focus heads down, you get the thing profitable and consistent.
But
But
it could
time
be part of the
passes.
planning. It could still be part of the business plan of this
Yes.
is where we're going, and at this certain junction, this is when it would make sense. You mentioned something about the landlord granting you the ability to do more leasehold improvements and to rejig, and maybe you close down for a month to do this big renovation and invest into the property that, by the way, you don't own at the end of it. But at the same token, I've also seen leases that there's a revenue generation component that
Mm.
if you make X amount of money, that you're going to start paying percentages to the landlord as well. And so all of a sudden you're going to be more efficient, making more money, but then the landlord is also going to reap the reward of having higher rent coming
Yeah.
to him because of your income levels.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I mean, again, at the end of the day, the being a tenant of somebody else's space, they're basically saying, we're going to let you use our space as long as it's a win-win relationship for both of us.
Yeah,
And
and more
mostly
so
as
for
long
the
as it's a
and
win
more so
relationship
for
for
the
me.
exactly. We'll let you let our space.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. And the reality of the matter is, Mark, if you're, as a landlord, you also want to make sure that you're renting your space to someone who has the financial ability to pay, right?
Right.
So there's a high probability that if you work with any kind of a like legitimate landlord, they asked for some financial information, that sort of thing, before they allowed you to sign the lease, right? The
Right.
privilege of
Right.
quiet enjoyment, I think they call it, of the space. And so you might already be well on your way to be qualified to own your own space versus not, um,
Yes.
you know. And so,
You're definitely going to have the business plan in place in order to justify it. So, right, like if you decide to go to the bank to get a loan to do leasehold improvements because you want to become more effective and so on,
Mhm.
you need all that detail and all those financials anyway.
You
Because
do,
the bank is
you
not going to
do.
look at you when you come in with a garbage bag full of receipts and go, "Yeah, I did really well this year."
No, that's exactly right. That's right. It's exactly right. And so, and sadly, that's where a lot of entrepreneurs are, right, with their bag full of receipts. And so
Yeah.
that's why it can be tricky. A lot of times, what we'll do is we try to work with their accountant directly or the CPA directly to take some of the pressure off them and get what we need and whatnot. But again, it's you talk about planning. If you're thinking about this, okay, when should you think about it? Well, when you sign that lease, you should be thinking about what's my next move, right? Number
Yeah.
one. And then halfway through the lease, I mean, you're a year, 2, 3 years out, your business is growing. You need to be thinking about the next step, the next 2 or 3 steps for your business. And maybe now's not the time, but maybe it will be in 12 months or 24 months.
Mhm.
Um, but there's a lot, I mean, there's a lot to sort of unwrap, and you really need to be educated about it because you want to make a smart decision. Just like with anything, there's a lot of options on the financing. I mean, again, we said from 0% down to 25% down, you can get a loan where you have covenants where your business has to perform, or they can call the loan. You've got loans where, like, the banks are famous for wanting you to have your deposits, like I said. And I'm not totally anti-bank, but I'm not sure it's the greatest idea to have your loan in the same bank with all of your operating accounts cash. Anyway, call me crazy, but I did live through 2008 in the real
Yes.
estate world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I remember sitting around a table where a bunch of CEO friends of mine had banks call loans on them and things like that. And um, so yeah, so there's things to research and understand before you go into it. And so, but if you have time and it's part of your strategic plan or vision for what you want to do, then it's infinitely doable.
Yeah. I do imagine that, the one message I'm getting in our conversation, you mentioned an accountant, you mentioned what you do. It is absolutely essential that we can't do this by ourselves. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they reach you if they need to use your services?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the easiest way is to go to our website, ownyourbuildingnow.com.
Okay.
It's ownyourbuildingnow.com. And on there, you mentioned my book. I've got my book, and you can get a free copy of it. All you got to do is pay for shipping, and I'll send it out to you. We also have a 2-minute assessment. It's like 20 questions, and it's customized, and it asks you, basically the question is, owning the commercial property right for your business? And so you go through that, and it'll give you a customized sort of report in 4 key areas, on maybe strengths, weaknesses, and whatnot. And it's just a starting point. And outside of that, we certainly have ownership strategy calls. We can get together on the phone and talk about, does it make sense? Because the last thing we want to do is put somebody in a business or a building that doesn't work for them. It's not a win
Right.
for them. It's not a win for us. So
Right.
that's where we come from.
Great. You mentioned your book. Could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, that there it is right there. Yeah, my book, I wrote it really just to outline a lot of the things that we've talked about today. Some of the misconceptions that are out there in the world about buying your building, some of the opportunities, the benefits from doing it, the risks, the potholes along the way, and basically about half the book sort of outlines the whole process that you go through to secure financing. And you can do it yourself. I mean, you can. I mean, it's like anything, you could do it yourself.
Yeah.
If that's what you want to do, I would definitely suggest reading the book. Um, but it's trickier and fraught with a little more danger if you try to go the road yourself.
Now, for those people who are very brave and they want to take control, they read your book, they want to
Mhm.
take ownership, what
Yeah.
motivational advice would you offer to help them stay the course? Because I can imagine that things are going to be popping up that'll throw a wrench in the works. And
Yeah.
then without having those experts around you, you might just turn around and go, fine, I'll just lease again.
Yeah, be realistic in your expectations that it's going to be, you know, from the time you actually dig in and you say, okay, we're moving forward, and you have your sort of your financials in order, figure it's going to be a 2 to 3 month process. And it's a process. And you're going to be back and forth. It's like playing tennis. There's going to be back and forth, whichever lender you end up going with, whichever program you end up choosing, there will be lots of back and forth and questions, and there will be occasionally you'll be like scratching your head, like, why do they want this? Um, but that's just the way it is. And at the end of the day, everyone's got to check all their boxes. But it will work, and you will get through it if you have a good plan and you have persistence and patience in the
So you mentioned
process.
3 to 4 months. Would it be fair to say that if strategically, if you pick 6 to 8 months and just, go through the process and like give yourself that time to be able to do it, would that be of benefit?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that would accelerate the actual process itself. So if your preparation is 3 or 4 months and you get all your ducks in a row, which is really what we like to do with people, then when you go find a property, you could close that in probably 8 weeks. I mean, because you've got everything, and that's really why things drag on and drag on is because people don't have everything together and they
Right.
don't understand. And it's like, well, things come up. Like, I will say this: it's like people try to, you know no one likes to talk about the skeletons in their closet, but that's one of the first questions that we ask, because in today's world, lenders, investors will find every skeleton, and including looking at your customer reviews, and they want to see how your customers think about your business. So there's a
So
lot
even
involved.
so even thing like so you mentioned customer reviews, but what about things like Glassdoor?
Mhm.
Are employees slamming you on social media as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all because it's about character, right? They
Yeah.
want to make sure that you are. I mean, it used to be just the credit report, right? Well, in commercial, it's your personal credit report, and that's sort of an indication of how well they pay and what their word is worth. But you also have a business credit report, and then again, you have all these. You have your customer client referrals on the glass door from employees. The Google ratings and all that. And obviously, an off rating here or there is not a big deal. But if it's, mostly bad ratings about, oh man, my experience with this business is terrible and these guys are crooks and blah, blah, blah. I mean, we're not going to want to loan money to that person, right? So,
Mhm.
so there's a lot involved. And so interestingly, we developed it's a 53 question questionnaire that we have somebody answer. It doesn't take that long, maybe about 30 minutes, but again, it uncovers a lot of these little things that need to be addressed up front, because most everything we deal with, if it's addressed up front, it's not a big deal. But if it shows up midstream in the process, or it pops up towards the end, then it can be a big deal. And I've seen more than one uh, transaction go kapooey because, oh, we didn't know you had this debt or this thing going on, and now we're going to find out about it late. You didn't disclose it, and they didn't think we'd find it, or the lender would find it, but yeah, they did.
I have to give you credit. I love that you use technical jargon like kaplooey. I think that's excellent. And it's official terminology 100% of the time. um, y- I mentioned at the earlier part of it, I came across a situation where somebody was going into a strip mall, and I
Mhm.
didn't realize that they have these things now as condos.
Mm.
Because I always thought, if you go into a strip mall, it's really difficult because you can never really buy into it. But now you have kind of these condo commercial complexes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those out there now. I mean, th- I'm not a huge fan of condos, just because you're an association and they can levy assessments and things like that. That's kind of the one downside of condos. But in a lot of cases, it is a great way for a business to get in that doesn't need but so much space, right? And they have to
Mhm.
have maybe a retail presence in a certain area. Um, and a lot of times they're easy to sell because generally they're smaller and they're in a trafficked area. So again, you can't really make a blanket statement about them per se, but I would definitely make sure that the condo association financials are strong. And that most of the condo owners are paying their assessments and things like that, because they can get into litigation and whatnot. So it's things to know up front. But generally speaking, if it's solid and strong, it's not a bad thing. You just need to be aware that there could be something coming down the pike with, like, when a new roof needs to be put on the building. Everyone gets to pitch in at that point in time. Basically,
Mhm. Yeah,
it's you're voluntold at that point that you're going to be helping to put a roof on.
gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, there are some challenges with it, but for people who are making those evolutionary steps into it, it might be an option.
Yeah, yeah,
With due
absolutely. Because
diligence, with due diligence. That's the magic
everything,
word.
yes, Mark. Due diligence is it. It is it. And who knows? I mean, maybe as they're making their steps, the condo is the first step for the first few years, and then
Yeah,
maybe they sell it, or maybe then they lease that to someone else and move on and get another building that they
right.
move their business into. So now they're building a sort of a commercial, real estate enterprise in addition to everything else they've got going on.
Everything else. So it becomes a spinoff. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit about some pitfalls and some cautionaries that we should be aware of as we enter into this. And we'll get to that right after this.
When you're delivering an important speech to a huge audience, it's easy to lose your place or go way over time. Give yourself an advantage with the Pro Speaker Presentation Speech Timer app. No more checking your watch or calling for time. The Pro Speaker Presentation Speech Timer app keeps you on track with easy-to-see timers, even changing color for visual prompts during your speech. And you can set audio cues to practice, or set it to vibrate so you don't even have to look. Be the pro you know you are. Download the app at speakerpresentationtimer.com.
I'd like to welcome Murphy and his law to this podcast. As you can tell, Paul and I are committed to serving businesses just like you. Right? So if you would like to explore how we could be of benefit, drop us a line. Our contact information is in the show notes. And I believe, Paul, that you have a bonus for the listeners. You mentioned something about they can get your book for free if they pay for shipping.
Yep, that's it. Absolutely. If you go
That's
to ownyourbuildingnow.com, they can pick it up right there.
Now, as a operator, like for what you do, you have certain processes that you kind of hang your flag on, that you kind of help remove the stress, the uncertainty, and the fear in making the transition. Could you dig a little bit deeper into how you make that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, just as piggybacking on what we were talking about just a little while ago, there's a lot that goes into the process, and the more the more due diligence, to use your term, that we do upfront with the individual borrower, the business owner, the easier and the less stressful the process is. So I believe the military, I don't know if they still do it, but I know they used to do something called dry firing, where they would train someone to shoot a rifle with no bullets, because people, when they fear the explosion of the bullet, coming out of the barrel, it causes them to reflexively jump back. And so when they're waiting for that explosion, then it's hard to stay focused on the mark. And so they taught people without pressure, knowing that it wasn't gonna, with no bullets, there's no explosion, there's no reaction. You learn to focus and breathe and do what you need to do. And so our philosophy is very similar. As I said, we start with the 53 question questionnaire to uncover the current state of the business, what the future goals of the business are, and some of the potential roadblocks and potholes along the way that we could encounter. And from there, we generally will connect up with the business owner's accountant and CPA directly with their permission, so we can take a lot of the heavy lifting off of, like, gathering docs and things like that from the business owner, so they could stay focused in their lane. And so once we understand sort of the present state of the business, where their future goals are, potential issues, and the financial picture, then we have some deep dive conversations in terms of options that are available in the market, in terms of different loan programs, different loan types. So we work with, gosh, I think 100 different investors plus that have different types of programs, and based on the specific business types, based on the specific building type, because there are different classes, based on how much down payment or equity injection the business owner wants to put in or can put in, and any what I call hair on the deal, like maybe there's a credit issue or a background issue that we need to address, and some investors are okay with that, some aren't. And so from there, we build sort of an option board to educate that borrower. And this is in advance of going out and looking at property. I mean, you might have a sense of, kind of what you want, but we really suggest this before, going into contract or anything. So, how much building you can afford, what does it look like? And then at that point, then we suggest partnering up with a great commercial real estate agent, where we could either recommend one, or if you have one, because now they know the specific market, they know the types of properties, and then we basically team up with them with what we know and we understand, and the options and opportunities, and have them to understand the market, to present options that might make sense. And a lot of commercial real estate agents, the really good ones, they know the market, and it's not like commercial is not like residential, where you're going to go on Zillow and find properties. A lot of them aren't listed. I mean, you have sites like LoopNet and things like that will list, but not all of them are listed. And so the commercial real estate world is more of almost like a good old boys network, where there's girls too, but they know each other. Smaller communities are tighter, and they generally work together pretty well. And so at that point, now you've got, what you can afford, the different loan program options. Now you've got the realtor involved that's looking to fit in this realm. And then at that point, you can feel confident. And so now you're basically ready, because any of the issues that maybe we've identified in the preliminary options, we've either fixed them, solved them, or put together a plan to address those well in advance. Like, there's a list of things too. You talked about, like, what are potential potholes and things that you have to discuss. Like, one of the things we discussed early on is, hey, if you're married, is your spouse on board? Right? Because your spouse may not be paying for the building, but your spouse is going to have something to say about it. And the last thing, I mean, I've seen this happen before, is that you get a business owner, particularly a guy that's like, he's doing everything on his own, and then all of a sudden the particular loan that he chooses, or the bank puts him in, requires his wife to sign as a guarantor, and she doesn't know this until the day of closing or the day before closing, and Vesuvius goes off, and rightfully so, right? So things like that you're going to address up front. The different covenants that you get into, like some banks and lenders will want to review your financials every year after you're in the loan. They want to make sure it's performing. Your business is still performing. So that's could be problematic, and some don't require that. Some will require you to take a lien on your personal home. So, based upon the equity position, they're like, well, if you have equity in your house, we're gonna go ahead and put a lien there. You can still sell your house, but if something goes south, we have a right to that. So there's ways to avoid that and mitigate that, but you got to know in advance, and you got to sort of know what you're going to do. The deposit thing we already talked about. Most of the local banks, and if we work with any bank at all, it's a local community bank. We don't do much with the big banks. They're really not for the small business people, but the local banks, they're going to want your deposits, and so you got to feel comfortable. Again, putting all your eggs in one basket. And so at least know going in what you're up against. And a lot of times we recommend a bank, based on the situation. And then the biggest thing is just being untruthful, or not necessarily intentionally being untruthful, but you don't know if you're not asked the question. A lot of times you don't think about it, and that's why we try to start up front with our questionnaire to uncover the dirt, because it's so much easier to deal with upfront than later in the process. And because first impressions really matter. And banks and lenders, they look at a lot of deals, and if you look at the numbers, the percentages are in the 20 to 30% range of what they approve. And most of them, if they don't get, and this kind of goes back to the DIY guys, if they don't get like a complete package with everything they want up front, or something kind of smells, then what they do is they put it on the back burner, and they're just not that interested in it anymore. And so, anyway, so these are some of the things that we do.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were saying that, I just fell back onto that one virtue of character.
Yeah.
Right? You're proving your character because you're partnering up with somebody who you're asking them for money, and they become a partner in your business essentially.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
right.
This has
That's
been
right.
such a great discussion, Paul. Do you have any last thoughts? Anything that we haven't talked about in the scheme of our topic today that you think is important to outline? Or maybe you have one magical motivational phrase that will inspire people to.
I'm not that guy, but I would say that, here's my take on the deal. It's like, I think business owners, and particularly business owners that are locally based, that have
Mhm.
an impact and influence locally with their employees, their customers, their families, that those people, we're the backbone of this country, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
and
For
we're the
both
ones that do the
countries.
influence. Yeah, right, absolutely. Of the free world. Let's just put it
There you
that way.
go.
That
There you go.
we're the we're the ones that really create opportunity. We're the ones that can set culture, and we're the ones that have an impact day to day, more so than governments and whatnot. I think because it's day to day. So I think it's important to be successful as an entrepreneur, and it's important to be long term, and it's important to plant your roots and go deep. And that's why I think this is something that's really important for everyone to consider, whether the timing is right now or not, but at least at some point in your future should consider, because you need to own it. You need to be that influencer. You need to be somebody that's planted the flag and say, we're here, we're going to make a difference, and we're here for the long run.
There's something to be said for I'm here to serve the community and I'm here to be part of the community.
Absolutely.
That was just a little bit of a, brainstorm that I just had. So could you remind everybody one more time how they could get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Ownyourbuildingnow.com. Keep it really simple.
Keep it really simple. Ownyourbuildingnow.com. Thank you
That's
so
it.
much, Paul. This has been brilliant. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us today.
Oh, Mark, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. You've been a great host.
Thank you so much. If you think that you need some help, why don't you reach out to us? Our contact info is in the show notes. And likewise, if you think that I could be of value to you, as always, I offer you, my standing offer is if you would like 30 minutes of my time to brainstorm your business with you and your team, feel free to book yourself on my online calendar. The link is in the show notes. It's the one that's marked meetwith.markhaine.com. It would be my absolute honor to be of service to you. And while you're at it, why don't you go ahead and leave a comment or review about this episode? I love getting your feedback. Was this of value to you? And of course, make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. That way you get notifications whenever I bring you fresh new content each and every week. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Marc Haine. I hope you stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope you dare to be the exception. Take good care.